Hello. As you're receiving this, the clergy of the Diocese of North Carolina have gathered at our annual Clergy Conference in Winston-Salem. I'm here with the Reverend Hugh Hollowell, who is one of the keynote speakers. The Reverend Hugh Hollowell is a Mennonite pastor many of you may remember by name. I met him over a year ago in Starbucks, and my conversation with him was one that really impacted me greatly. Hugh, welcome.
Thank you, Bishop.
I've got to tell you, that conversation that I had with you over a year ago now in Starbucks,
Right.
we were talking about your serving here as a Mennonite pastor, and the Mennonite community said something to you like, we have come to the realization that the church can no longer wait for its congregation to come to it, but the church must go where the congregation is.
Right.
That conversation began my thinking about what it means to be people living in and people witnessing in Galilee. Hugh, tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about what got you to Raleigh, North Carolina.
Well, thank you, Bishop. I've been here 5 years ago last month. 5 years ago, I moved here specifically with the mandate to, what would it look like to be the church that goes to the poor? What would it be like to be the church among the poor, rather than planning a building somewhere and waiting for the poor to find the church? We had these theories and ideas, but not a lot of practical, and so we wanted to put practical bones on it. And so in the beginning, it started with just my sitting in Moore Square, my sitting at the homeless shelters, my sitting in the soup lines and the soup kitchens, and having conversations. And most of the time they didn't start off as theological conversations. They just started off as, I'm Hugh. And what I learned is that when you are homeless, often the people you are surrounded by are mentally ill, even if you yourself are not mentally ill. So people who are homeless are eager to have conversations. So if you're willing to have a conversation with them, you can fill up your day. So it really started, I started having conversations, and they trusted me, and then I was able to be their minister. Which to me is much more incarnational than the opposite approach, where I come in and I say, hey, I'm the great minister, I'm here to fix all your problems.
Right.
Instead, we basically started with relationships and how can I be your friend, and then earned the right to be their minister.
Yes.
I'm 40, and in my 20s, I was a financial advisor. I was, basically I helped rich old people hide their money from the government. I grew up on that whole watching Wall Street and Gordon Gekko and Greed is Good and Reagan capitalism and the whole thing. And I grew up a poor boy in rural Mississippi, and so I just wanted out. And it looked like those guys had it. And so, so I spent my 20s working for a variety of different investment banks. And when about 10 years ago, Mennonites tend to be skeptical of language like this, but I felt like I heard God speaking to me, and what it kept saying over and over again is, it's not all about you. And I really didn't know what to do with that. And so it started me on a path. It started with the Catholics and Dorothy Day and Thomas Merton, and those people will mess you up. And then an Episcopalian layman, William Stringfellow, who also wrecked my world.
Yeah, he's one of mine.
Yeah, exactly. And it kept going, and eventually I found the Mennonites, and I said, oh, these are my people.
Wow.
And that's kind of, and ultimately it culminated with me deciding to move here intentionally, to stake out a place, if you will.
And so now you have a congregation, you have a ministry, Love Wins Ministries?
Absolutely.
What does that title mean? How did you get that title?
There's a number of, I say it's the perfect title because it can mean a lot of different things, depending on, it just kind of encapsulates our philosophy of ministry. Often when we seek to do ministry, So I had a mentor one time tell me that you can do things to someone, you can do things for someone, or you can do things with someone, right?
Yes.
But that to is the easiest. And so that's where we default. We default in doing things to someone. And often that's really convenient for us. It's somewhat less good for them long term. No one likes to be made someone else's project. Right. So we have this idea that, and we find it in the Christian story. Because if the idea of we're going to love you in advance. We're going to love you before you deserve it. We're going to love you before you're worthy. We're going to love you before you've done all the right things. We're going to, I was talking to a Wesleyan theologian once, and he said, you're talking about prevenient grace. And I said, actually, I'm talking about prevenient love. Because we're the love that goes before. And so we have this idea that we don't care what you've done. We don't care where you've been. We're going to love you. And it's up to you to prove us wrong.
Your congregation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always think of it in terms of an onion, like a 3-layer onion. At the core, we have what we call our worshiping community. And that's what most people think of when they think of my church. That's the 15 to 25 people that show up on Sunday. Okay? And we're a motley crew of folks, right? We've got me. We've got people who have been homeless and slept under bridges last night. We have people who come from the shelter. We have people who lived in the shelter for years and are now housed, almost like alumni, who continue to worship with us. We have volunteers who are engineers and stockbrokers and corporate people who come and worship with us. It's just a motley group of folks, right? And then the next layer out is what I consider my working congregation. Now, if I pastored a steeple, these are my Christmas and Easter people, right? These are the people that haven't been to church in 4 years, but when Grandma dies, I'm expected to do the funeral, right? And so these are the people who, I really like the metaphor. When I was a kid growing up in rural Mississippi, the preacher came to your house, right? You didn't come to church for a while. The preacher showed up at the house, always at an inconvenient time. And so I do a lot of field work where I just take a day and I go out and I visit Harry on the steps of the courthouse, or I visit Alice at the soup kitchen. And they're never going to set foot in my building. But when Alice gets sick and she's in the hospital, I'm the one she calls to come do ministerial visits. When Harry is sick and thinks he's dying, I'm the one he calls because he wants me to do the funeral. So I get to be their minister, even if I don't get to be their preacher. And then the third layer out is what I consider my parish, which is an old-fashioned word we really don't use anymore. But my neighborhood, or the people, so I consider meeting with you, for instance, parish work. Because it affects how we all think of homeless people. Or meeting with the city council, or having lunch with the mayor, or whatever. So I think of that as parish work. So I see my ministry locally as having those 3 different parts all make up my church.
That's powerful. What's at the core of your ministry?
So I have 2 answers to that, right? Which I don't know if you can have 2 cores.
They call it dual core.
Right, exactly, right. So on one core, at one level, we believe that at its core, homelessness and poverty are relationship problems. Okay? The reason that I could never be homeless, or you could never be homeless, is because of the numbers we have in our cell phone. Those are the people who stand between us and homelessness. And so the people we know that are homeless either don't have those relationships, or they have exhausted them. Right? So if I have a platform, that's my key plank. So then I guess the question is, what does that platform rest on? And when you boil it all down, I'm a preacher. And to me, this all rests in the model we see in the life of Jesus. Jesus did leave the 99 and go after the one. The way I understand it, the kingdom of God spreads best through relationships and not through organization. Sometimes organization is necessary, But we have to, I think it's the devil, if you will, that we have to fight, because another hero of mine, the Reverend Will Campbell, said that any institution, the minute it gets more than 3 people, begins to fight in order to perpetuate itself.
Yes.
And if you get 4 people, there's a battle for leadership. And by the fifth person, you're already planning your succession plan.
Right.
And why you got together in the room is thrown out the window. Forgotten, right.
Yeah.
And so, so we strive really, really hard to be incarnational, to be one-on-one, because it's much more important to me that we be incarnational and be personal than it is that we be efficient. I always say that the Salvation Army wants to feed 300 people a day, and they don't care which 300. On the other hand, I'm worried that I haven't seen Willie in 2 days.
Right.
And that's the difference
Right.
in our approach.
His eye is on a sparrow, and so is yours.
Right.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Bishop Curry. Greatly appreciated.
Jesus once said, if you would be my disciple, you must deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. Reverend Hugh Hollowell is living proof that it can be done. Information on Love Wins Ministries will be included with this edition of Please Note. There are links to their webpage, and you can learn more about Hugh and the work that he and others are doing in Christ's name. God bless you, and keep the faith.